Hello everybody and thank you for joining our session here today. My name's Vicki Christopher and I'm part of the early childhood team at the University of Southern Queensland. I've been fortunate enough to be involved in some research with some wonderful colleagues, Doctors Michelle Turner and Nicole Green, the process and findings of which I'm delighted to be sharing with you here today in our project Social Justice in the Early Childhood Context, Educator Voices. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from where I sit today to share this research, the Quandamooka people, as the First Nations owners of the lands where I now stand. I pay respect to their elders, laws, customs, and recognise that these lands have always been places of teaching, research, and learning. I acknowledge the cultural diversity of all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and pay respect to elders past, present, and emerging, and the important contributions Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have and continue to have in Australian society. I would also like to thank the Charles Sturt University Research Group for the opportunity to share this research with you all in this online format. As I said, we're grateful for this opportunity to share the findings of this research as it provides a respectful context of listening to and hearing early childhood educators' experiences and perceptions of social justice in early childhood. Interviewing early childhood educators allowed us to hear their voices to gain valuable insights into their lived experiences. Early childhood education and care in Australia has long been associated with the concept of social justice. However, a clear understanding of what this looks like across contexts is not clear. Changes occurring in contemporary Australian context demand consideration of the critical influence of social justice within early childhood education. We had been discussing the idea of social justice and there being multiple meanings attached to this term with varied understandings of what social justice is as a concept and as a practice. And we wondered what that means for early childhood educators and specifically to early childhood educators working within rural contexts. We identified opportunities for research to explore the multiple meanings, varied understandings and practices of social justice through the voices of early childhood educators working in changing rural contexts. Early childhood educators in rural contexts may face social justice issues mirroring those in their local communities. They contribute significantly to building the resilience and resourcefulness needed to address contemporary challenges in these communities. Country towns in southwest Queensland have experienced changing demographics as a result of growth in non-traditional industries such as gas and mining developments. According to relevant literature, the changing social makeup of the communities have placed a strain on existing resources, services, facilities, and housing affordability. These issues are acknowledged as being challenges for a community's ability to engender social justice. The aim of the research was to understand and give voice to educator practices that reveal notions of social justice inherent in their everyday practice in changing rural, regional contexts. Hearing the voices of early childhood educators to gain a sophisticated understanding of their perceptions of social justice and their role in providing education for a socially just world is something that we identify as both important and necessary. So with these wonderings as a team, we formalised our research question through a university ethics application to ask, how do early childhood educators perceive early learning environments as places and spaces for privileging social justice in rural areas? The question was important in providing opportunities for educators to have their voices heard. We captured these voices through one-on-one in-depth semi-structured interviews with 5 educators from rural settings identified as areas experience significant growth in population diversity. The study employed an interpretive qualitative method for data analysis, data collection and interpretation of early childhood educators' perspectives and reflections. We employed a 2-layer analysis to explore the data. Firstly, to identify key themes captured in educator narratives, and secondly, to provide a deeper understanding of these participant voices. No attempt was made to provide an objective description of social justice, rather understandings emerged through educators' articulation of their experiences in the ways that each participant interprets, describes, and explains their realities. The approach allowed for engagement around educators' personal narratives within their early childhood service without assuming educators' understandings or knowledge of social justice. An initial thematic analysis of the data revealed three key themes. These identified the premise of social justice in three distinct ways. Social justice as complex and difficult to define, social justice as creating a learning place, and social justice as contextual relevance. The data produced through the interviews were the first level of interpretive material from which further interpretation and analysis could proceed. An interpretive lens study allowed for the selection of a small informative sample to discover what it means for educators to be in that setting, what's going on for them, what their meanings are, what the world looks like in that particular rural setting, all in relation to our question about social justice. The three emergent themes highlight examples of some of the findings. Interestingly, the themes have underscored the way that early learning environments are places where parts of the larger space of the surrounding communities, the everyday lives of the children and educators in these rural places, circumscribe the way social justice was attended to in the early learning environment. I'd now like to share some of the words of our educators regarding each of these key themes to bring greater understanding of their perceptions of the concept and practice of social justice. Firstly, social justice as complex and difficult to define. The 5 educators in this study acknowledged their uncertainty of the term and shared their reservations in defining the term social justice. Despite their reservations in identifying meaning of the term, through discussion of their everyday practices, educators articulated key aspects and broad ideas which have been associated with discussions around and conceptualizations of social justice in previous research. So a focus on rights, as described by Schreiberg, a focus on fairness and equity, described by Moy, Briggs, O'Brien, Rawls, a focus on participation, as outlined by Buettner, Schmidt and Lobo. Specifically, participants articulated notions of fairness, and as identified in their own words, they stated, I don't know if it's social justice, but it's the justice for everyone. And then when we talk about it to the children, we have a lot of discussions about whether things are fair or not. To me personally, it means making sure that everyone gets a fair go. Analysis of the interview data brought to light philanthropic aspects regarding equal access for all members of the educators' rural communities. Equal access to things, just helping, kind of helping out, making sure everyone's kind of, just lifting everybody up, I suppose. And again, we're pretty lucky because our centre was taken over by a not-for-profit church organisation originally, and their philosophy is for helping these small rural areas to have access to quality early childhood education. I guess what it means to me is to ensure that every child ends up at school with equal access. So when they leave early childhood to get to school, that every child should be on a level playing field. And that means supporting the child, supporting the family, and supporting the community around them and the wider community as well. And another, it's just having that real, authentic meaning of why we're doing what we are doing, which is basically forming that sense of identity for that child and family, a sense of belonging. That's a learning opportunity for our other children. That is social justice coming together and being equality. And a couple more. If you asked a staff member, do they teach social justice? They'd probably say no, but they do every day. I think that I don't think they find many barriers or challenges in that they teach at the level that they find acceptable and they understand the level that is accessible to the community. I don't think anyone goes above and beyond to teach social justice. It's not a focus of theirs. At this point, our focus is coming from trying to manage the staff to ensure inclusivity and working with every family at an individual capacity for what they need. And finally, well, I had to Google what social justice meant when you wanted me to talk to you about social justice. Looking to social justice as creating a learning place, the educators exemplified their understandings of social justice as they shared narratives of their lived experience in the early childhood service, and specifically as they described their practices. Social justice was perceived by the educators as being necessary to developing relationships, defining roles, and utilising resources, rather than being about curriculum content to be explicitly taught. I don't know what we actually intentionally teach it, so to speak. Probably not so much intentionally, but just in our everyday interactions. I feel like it's something that you do, not really something that you know, but something that you do. I suppose it's just sort of through the course of the day as it comes up. I mean, we don't really, unless there's an event coming up, we don't go out of our way to plan it, so to speak. Relationships with children and their families were emphasised by the educators as fundamental. Being flexible and encouraging a sense of safety, security, and belongingness were all communication and relational practices deemed as important for nurturing and sustaining genuine relationships with families and children. Educators discuss the importance of respecting children as individuals and appreciating each family as having unique needs. Planning for connectedness in their practices facilitated the educators in knowing each family rather than knowing about the family, as well as being attuned to community events and circumstances. A quote, "We probably try our hardest to make sure we are, with our inclusion support, that we're not just including, because we don't have a lot of cultural inclusion, but making sure that we're catering to all family kinds of lifestyle, home environments, and kind of things like that." It's not just their cultural, but their family context as well. How we make sure we're kind of being open to all and just having full access. In this way, educators identified understandings of social justice as part of the educator's personal and or professional philosophy of care and practice, and as being something lived rather than taught. They saw social justice as a response to fortuitous moments. Contextual relevance and was revealed as being of significance to educator perceptions of early learning environments for privileging social justice. In one particular example, yet to be shared, the educator spoke of the idea of sharing in play scenarios and how the way sharing was taught or enacted was very much dependent on context. This in particular rural space had seen significant upheaval, with 44 local families being bought out for mining, where families felt they really had no choice about giving up their farms. As the educator explained for this reason, children discuss with educators the concept of sharing in terms of fairness and rights, and with reason, questioning if fair for you means fair for me. Should I stop riding the bike because you want to turn? Across contexts, educators identified numerous opportunities for discussions with children about events in their own lives in which respect, trust, and belonging was enacted. Some further quotes. "I think you need to be contextual. You need to make it important to your community. Not just an overall view, but you need to be specific to your community's needs. You really have to be on top of your community issues and make that your centre is really catering for those needs." More snippets of the educator's experiences and perceptions. "I think maybe just getting to know your families and your context, because everywhere is going to be different and you might have come from a different centre. You might not have been to the centre, but just making sure that you're catering for your community and families. Getting to know the community really and knowing what their needs are going to be." Yeah, we've had situations where we're trying to support parents through domestic violence situations and stuff like that, but having to be very careful because everyone knows who the domestic violence worker is. Everybody knows who that family is. I suppose you can see these voices gave rise to these three key themes. Social justice is complex and difficult to define, as creating a learning place, and as contextual relevance. To appreciate the experiences and perspectives of the educators at a deeper level, we applied place as a framework to each of these emerging themes. This recursive phase of analysis and interpretation enabled us to see beyond the ways that early childhood educators were doing or working within their environments, to bring meaning to how they privilege social justice through what Aoki refers to as a lived situation pregnantly alive in the presence of people. In doing so, we had the opportunity to consider a different perspective to allow us to really hear the voices of participants, providing the opportunity to gain deeper meaning, clarity, and more thoughtful listening. It was necessary to consider this secondary analysis as many underlying thoughts and feelings were presented. It provided a way to attend to what educators were saying and to provide a true representation of their voice. Critical to our research was a presentation of educator voices in a way that did justice to their perceptions, ensuring their ownership of the data remained central without imposed judgment. We believe that opening these discussions and giving voice to educators will provide improved opportunities for educators, as well as for children and families. When asked to articulate the implication of our research for children for this particular presentation, we revisited our educator voices and drew on what the theories had stated to frame these statements of implication. We stated, educators want you to thrive in a place where you feel safe, where things are fair, and where you develop a strong sense of belonging. Educators are learning about who you are and where you come from. You can help by sharing about your family and your experiences at home and in your community. In the words of educators, some of their experiences of their interpretations of social justice illustrated this desire for children to feel safety, fairness, and belonging, and the value of sharing in children's experiences beyond their time at the service. I mean, we have one particular child who likes to, in terms of gender we're talking about earlier, we have one child who likes to dress up as a little girl. And his parents, they just say, no way, they don't agree with it. So that's a matter for discussion among us with the staff and how we can support him and keep his family happy. Looking at the further implications, it's about participation and rights of people, even in their little game situations. Is it actually fair for someone if someone comes and asks for something? Do you have to give it to them straight away? Is that fair for you, or is that just fair for them? That's where our social justice comes down to everyone has a right to something, but there's a time and a place for it. So even at our kindy, it's as simple as if they want something, they'll walk over and say, oh, Vicki, can I please have that bike once you've finished it with it? And then they'll walk away. And then they'll walk away with the trust knowing that once you're finished with that bike, you'll come find them wherever they are. And I guess we've built up a lot of work around that because I guess that's probably my belief that people shouldn't have to give up what they want just because someone else wants to use it. And this is the particular example I referred to earlier, that related to the contextual relevance of this community, where some families were forced to sell due to mining. Implications for families. Educators are committed to your children, your family, and your community. They work hard to understand how they can support you to feel that you belong. Being in partnership with you is both welcomed and appreciated. In discussing their work with children and families in their communities, the educators acknowledged a broad range of matters as issues of social justice. Children with additional needs, Indigenous families, families of low socioeconomic status, families affected by drought, fly-in, fly-out families, and workers and their families, gender identity. For example, the complexities of the rural context in which they lived and worked. So things such as social isolation, drought, and socioeconomic status brought to light mental health as a current community issue. And some quotes here. Now we recognise there's a need to care for the mother's mental health and make sure that she's okay and that she's getting a break. And another, that's really the way that we can take care of that social justice, is by knowing that families, knowing the difficulties and how we can help them. When articulating implications for practitioners, we state, be confident in your skills, knowledge, and dispositions. Take the time to critically reflect on your practice to enhance your intentionality for promoting social justice. Some quotes. Through our approach with relationships, that is our success, because our educators are feeling more connected. They're feeling more of a sense of belonging in their role. They get that professional growth. In terms of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, we believe that providing educators with opportunities to have their voices heard is essential to developing and maintaining quality education practices. This quote by Hard, Press and Gibson rings true to this. Critically informed, intentional, and strategic organisational leadership can play a pivotal role in creating changed circumstances and opportunities for children and families. Such leadership includes positional and distributed elements, articulation of values and beliefs, and collective action that is mindful and informed. The findings of the research have provided for further wonderings, motivating further research. It's been a revelation to hear educators' voices, and we now have the opportunity to project those voices. Their personal narratives provided a snapshot of the reality of the many and varied contexts in which educators undertake their daily practice. These voices have provided us with a richer understanding of their insights and of how context is particularly important given their rural frame of reference. Given educators' rich discussion of social justice, although initially identifying it as difficult to define, we're left to wonder where these understandings do come from. We now move forward to looking at key Australian early childhood documents, such as the Early Years Learning Framework and the National Quality Standard, to ascertain in what ways the social justice as a concept and practice is embedded. Educator interviews allowed for the sharing of perspectives, philosophy, experiences, and practices. Although identifying a lack of intentionality, educators revealed dispositions consistent with social justice notions, reflecting curricular guideline expectations. Educators voiced an understanding that social justice exists as part of their pedagogy. This research is important in bringing pedagogical conversations to the forefront regarding early childhood educators' understandings of their role in creating a socially just learning environment. The research has opened greater possibilities for future consideration of social justice in early childhood education, and importantly, what early childhood educators have to say about it. Nicole, Michelle, and myself are lecturers of early childhood education. We see the findings of this research to be really important to preparing our pre-service educators for current contexts. We do not want to make assumptions about our early childhood educator understandings, nor the basis of their perceptions. We believe that this and subsequent research is powerful and necessary in generating new knowledge of educator understandings of social justice and the roles and responsibilities of early childhood educators, but also of higher education in sharing these insights. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation. And should you have any questions, queries, insights, or interest, please contact myself, Michelle, or Nicole at the University of Southern Queensland. Many thanks.